Stories woven through the years, faith and strength through joys and tears. Women called, their voices bright, walking boldly in God's light. And shine, their stories live, faithful hearts, so much to give. From the past their voices say, God is working still today. Daughters strong, their light still gleams, guiding us through hope and dreams.
Welcome back to Daughters of Grace, Women of the Bible. If you're just joining us, we're journeying through the powerful story of Ruth, an outsider, a widow, and a woman of courage who stepped out in faith and into God's divine plan. In chapter 2, we see how God begins to provide, not just physically, but spiritually. Ruth meets Boaz, a man who will change everything. So grab your Bible, get comfortable, and let's dive into the next part of Ruth's story. Subscribe and stay connected as we release a new chapter each week, which I hope helps you on your spiritual journey. Now let's see what happens to Ruth and Naomi after they arrive back in Bethlehem. Ruth Chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, a field of providence. Verse 1, Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. We are introduced to Boaz, a respected man from Naomi's late husband's family. This one verse quietly lays the groundwork for something powerful God is about to do. Verse 2, And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, Go ahead, my daughter. Ruth takes initiative. She's not waiting for help. She steps out in faith to provide for herself and Naomi. This was allowed under Jewish law. The poor could glean the leftover grain in the fields, Leviticus 19:9 through 10. Verse 3. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. I love that phrase, as it turned out. What seemed like chance was actually God's hand. Ruth didn't plan it, but God led her to the exact field where grace was waiting. Verses 4 to 7. Boaz notices Ruth. Verse 4. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you. They answered. Boaz stands out immediately. He's a man who speaks blessing and honor even in everyday work. Verse 5. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, Who does that young woman belong to? Boaz notices Ruth. Not just her presence, but something about her spirit catches his eye. Verse 6. The overseer replied, She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. Verse 7. She said, Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. Ruth's hard work and humility are already being noticed. She didn't demand anything. She asked respectfully, and she's worked diligently all day. Verses 8 to 13. Grace in the field. Verse 8. So Boaz said to Ruth, My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Boaz offers Ruth protection and a place of belonging. He sees her value and extends grace in a way that goes far beyond what's expected. Verse 9, watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. This is kindness beyond custom. Ruth is treated not as a foreigner, but with honor and dignity. Verse 10, at this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Ruth is deeply humbled. She knows she hasn't earned this favor, and that's what makes it grace. Verse 11, Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. Verse 12, may the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. That phrase, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, paints a beautiful picture of God as a sheltering protector. Verse 13, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. Ruth is comforted, not just by Boaz's actions, but by his kindness and words. This beautiful moment in Ruth's story is the inspiration for our original song titled Fields of Grace. It captures the heart of what just happened, how God meets us with mercy, provision, and compassion, even when we feel unworthy. Let this song remind you that grace still meets us in our own fields of uncertainty. Now here is our song, Fields of Grace.
Out in the fields beneath the sky, I walk in faith, I don't ask why. With every step, I do my part, serving God with a humble heart. No crowd, no stage, no grand display, but He sees me every day. In the fields of grace I find my place, working in love, walking in faith. Every step, every seed I sow, God sees the grace that quietly grows. Like Ruth among the golden grain, I rise with strength through joy and pain. I give my best, I trust His plan. I'm held in mercy by His hand. It's not the world that gives me worth, but the one who shaped the earth. In the fields of grace I find my place, working in love, walking in faith. Every step, every seed I sow, God sees the grace that quietly grows. Not every story needs to shine. Sometimes grace is slow and kind, but heaven knows the path I take, and every move I choose to make. In the fields of grace I find my place, working in love, walking in faith. Every step, every seed I sow, God sees the grace that quietly grows. So I will walk these fields each day, and live in grace along the way.
Verses 14 to 17, abundance beyond expectation. Verse 14, at mealtime Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. Boaz welcomes Ruth to his table. It's not just provision, it's abundant provision. She eats until she's full and even has leftovers. Verse 15, as she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Verse 16, even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. Boaz tells the workers to leave blessings on purpose for Ruth to find. That's how grace works. God sometimes places blessings directly in our path. Verse 17, so Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. That's about 30 to 40 pounds of grain, a huge amount for one day. Ruth's hard work combined with God's favor brings incredible results. Verses 18 to 23. Hope begins to bloom again. Verse 18. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Verse 19. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. Naomi's heart stirs again. Hope is coming back. Verse 20. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." This is the first mention of the kinsman redeemer, a role that will become vital in the next chapters. Verse 21. Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Verse 22. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." Verse 23. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Ruth remained faithful and humble, working through the harvest, and while it may seem like just another ordinary season, God is doing something extraordinary behind the scenes. Closing reflections, Ruth. Chapter 2 is a beautiful reminder that God often meets us in the middle of our ordinary days, in fields of work, in quiet obedience, in moments we don't think are special. God is writing a story of grace. Ruth didn't chase blessing. It followed her because of her faith, humility, and heart. God used Boaz to extend that blessing in a way that reflected his own heart toward us. But to fully appreciate this chapter, it helps to understand just how critical the harvest season was in ancient Israel. Everything revolved around the harvest. People lived close to the land. What they grew was what they survived on. The main grains during Ruth's time were barley and wheat. These were staples used to make bread, porridge, roasted grain, and sometimes even a kind of barley cake or griddle bread. When Ruth sat down with Boaz and the workers, he offered her bread and roasted grain dipped in vinegar wine, a simple but hearty meal for working people. This meal was an act of community and kindness. She wasn't just being fed, she was being welcomed. The harvest wasn't just about food, it was about survival. If the harvest failed, people would go hungry through the winter. But if the harvest was good, it meant safety, strength, and provision. That's why Ruth's ability to glean, even just leftovers, was so powerful. It meant hope. It's no accident that this moment of provision and grace came during harvest. Ruth stepped into the field needing only food, but God was preparing a future, a family, and a legacy. May we be reminded that in our own seasons of harvest, or even in seasons of waiting, God is still working. And His grace is often closer than we think, even in the fields of our everyday lives. If this chapter touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share this video so others can hear the beauty of Ruth's story. Join us next week for Chapter 3, A Bold Step of Faith, The Threshing Floor. We'll also share another original song inspired by Ruth's continuing journey. Until next time, blessings to you all from everlasting near.
Stories woven through the years, faith and strength through joys and tears. Women called, their voices bright, walking boldly in God's light. And shine, their stories live, faithful hearts, so much to give. From the past their voices say, God is working still today. Daughters strong, their light still gleams, guiding us through hope and dreams.